Hello there, I'm Mac, and welcome to Mac84. Today we're going to be looking at some old Macs, but before we get into that, I just want to give a little special shout out to the Vintage Apple subreddit community. They're a great group of Apple and Macintosh enthusiasts, and they have already given this channel a lot of positive feedback and support. So thank you guys. If you are not familiar with them, check them out. I'm going to put a link here or in the description somewhere. And yeah, there's always a lot of great posts going on there, so definitely something to check it out if you're into old Apple and Mac stuff. So, on to the main event. Today we're going to be looking at the Macintosh IIcx. Now, it's not the oldest Macintosh that I own, but it is the first one I remember using and was our first family computer. So, I definitely have a lot of fond memories about this computer. So, what I'll be doing is we'll bring this down into the basement, get a closer look at it, boot it up, see what it could do, what makes it different from machines of that era, and go from there. So, without further ado, let's jump right into it. In order to fully understand why the Macintosh II series was truly special, we have to go back to the original Mac. The original Macintosh, released in 1984, was a revolutionary product. It was compact, easy to use, and had a wonderful graphical user interface. However, some were critical about the design, largely its compact, closed-door system. You couldn't even open up the system to upgrade the memory, which was really common at the time for other computers. Although later models like the Macintosh SE would resolve these issues to a degree, it wasn't until 1987 where the world would have its first truly expandable Mac. The Macintosh II debuted with a number of firsts for Apple. It was the first to be designed as a modular system. All previous Macs had a built-in 9-inch monochrome display. Because of this, it was also the first color-capable Macintosh. That is, of course, if you had enough money for a color graphics card and a color monitor. The Macintosh II made up for anything the original Mac lacked, and then some. Now, if you didn't have a lot of space on your desk, thankfully Apple answered your prayers with the Macintosh IIcx in 1989. This was a smaller variant in the Macintosh II series. To save some space, instead of 6 NuBus expansion slots, you only got 3. However, keep in mind you still needed to use 1 NuBus expansion slot for a video card. This is because a built-in video port was not included on the Macintosh IIcx. However, a built-in video port would be later added to the Macintosh IIci model that would follow. Okay, well, we have the Macintosh IIcx all plugged in here. I have it plugged into this Apple 13-inch color monitor, and let's boot it up and take a look. So unfortunately, it seems my Macintosh IIcx does not want to start up. I don't know what the issue could be. I'm guessing maybe there's something wrong internally. I tried swapping the power supply with that of the IIci, and that didn't seem to solve the issue. Although I did get the IIcx to boot up only a few days ago when I was preparing for this video. So I'm not really sure what's wrong, but I'm going to take a deeper look into things and see if we can figure this out. After taking a look at the motherboard, it looks like this little guy is having some capacitor issues. At least that's my guess. I think I see some residue from capacitors leaking on the board, and that would explain why it turns on sometimes, but not others. Leaking capacitors are a big issue, especially in old computers like this one. It could destroy your motherboard, and it's better to just replace them and get it over with, rather than worry about a ticking time bomb inside of your Mac. While you're replacing the capacitors, take a look at the battery inside this computer. In fact, before you even replace the capacitors, look at the battery and remove it. These machines are old. I've unfortunately had a few Macs that the battery has leaked and destroyed the motherboard. So if you haven't done so already and you have some old Macs, even if they're fairly recent and only from the late 90s or the early 2000s, take the computer apart, take the battery out. Better safe than sorry. With that being said, let's take this guy upstairs and get a better look at it. Now, opening up these machines is quite easy. First, you want to unplug everything, of course, power cord, keyboard, display, everything. So nothing plugged into the machine. And you're going to look right here. Most of these machines do not have a screw there, although they did originally, but most people open them up and they forget to put them back in or whatever. So make sure that screw is not there. Once the screw is removed, these plastic tabs here, just put your fingers under them, lift them up, and the whole top comes off. Very easy, very simple. Now you have full access to the inside of the computer. Since we're going to be working with sensitive electronic components, you'll need to ground yourself. There are a few methods of doing this, but one is to touch the bare metal of the power supply. This will discharge any electricity that you'll be carrying. Now we'll move forward with removing the NuBus cards from this computer. So the first thing you want to do is take out any cards you have. I have a Macintosh display card here. Put that to the side. I also have a Apple networking card here, so I'm going to put that to the side as well. With the cards removed, we could get a better look at the motherboard here. Looks like there is some residue by these old caps. So maybe they've leaked, maybe they're just dead. I have no idea. But let's take out some more components so we get a better look. If your Macintosh has the original hard drive, then it may have this LED holder. If so, this is quite easy to remove. Wiggle the LED holder on the inside with one hand while using your thumbnail or plastic tool to lift the LED out of the case. If you'd like, you could also remove the LED from the LED holder. The next thing we're going to remove is the speaker. This is fairly straightforward. You have the cable going to the motherboard. Just take a grab at the base and just pull that straight up. The speaker has a plastic tab that's attached to the case. So with your finger, lift that tab up with your thumb here and just lift it back and it slides right out. If your Macintosh has the programmer keys, which are the interrupt and reset keys, you can easily remove these by putting your finger under the plastic here and just lifting up, and they just slide right out. Next, we have to remove this screw that's in the center of the motherboard before we attempt anything else. However, my machine screw has been missing for quite some time. Okay, next we're going to need to take out the power supply. This isn't too bad. You actually just lift it out of the machine. There is a socket that the power supply is connected to on the motherboard, so if you get some resistance, it just means that the power supply is pretty firm in that socket. So keep prying it up a little bit, wiggling it from side to side, and you shouldn't have too much trouble. What I usually do is use two hands, put one hand under the power supply here, you can see there, and put one hand between the hard drive and reach your fingertips under the power supply. Once your hands are in this position, using my left hand, I'm going to start prying it up a bit, as well as the right hand. My right hand is directly where that socket is. And just keep wiggling it back and forth. There are grooves associated with the power supply, so it's going to slide out pretty easily. And the only thing you have to watch out for is this plastic hard drive and floppy disk caddy. There is a bit of a hook here, so if you press down, I'll get you a better picture later. Here we go. If you press down on the hook, it lets this caddy sort of come apart here. Now you can take the caddy out at this point with some effort, but it's easier once the power supply is removed. Now that the power supply is removed, we just have to work on the hard drive and the disk drive. Now this is pretty easy. In fact, some of it came apart here while I was taking out the power supply, so let me put it back into place. There's a clip here that we're going to be pushing against, and that lifts this out. But we can't move this disk holder just yet. You'll first need to remove the hard drive and floppy drive cables. So I'm going to start with the SCSI cable. You can see it's plugged in here. I'm going to just gently tug at the very base of that cable, and it comes right out of the slot. Some of these cables may have tags you could tug on, like this floppy disk data cable here. That makes it easier, so I'm just going to tug on that cable to pull this out. Just tug directly up, and you can see that's removed. Now the hard drive cable here, let me get a better shot of this. The hard drive cable here has a clip on it. So to take that out, you have to squeeze the clip and just pull it upwards. Wiggle it back and forth sometimes helps, and it comes right off. So with everything removed, now we just need to pull this tab. It's already pulled away here a bit since we've been playing around here, and the whole disk drive caddy just comes right out of the machine. So now you can see here we have our Macintosh IIcx motherboard, and that's really all that's left here. I put the battery back in this machine just to show you how to remove the battery, so we're going to be doing that right away. Now these batteries are very old. You've likely never replaced them, or if you've gotten the machine secondhand, unless there was an issue, the batteries may not have been replaced. The problem is that these batteries are old, they tend to leak and bust and make a whole mess out of your computer, which could even destroy the entire thing. So we want to take that out. If you're lucky, you could just wiggle the top back and forth, but they do have these clips that catch from side to side. So you may need to use a small screwdriver and pry them out. Thankfully, in my case, that was not needed. So now the battery is exposed, you can just grab it in the middle and pull it right out, and just be sure to safely dispose of that battery. Thankfully, as far as I can tell, there's no leaking from that battery, so everything looks good. Now we just have to take the motherboard out of the case. This is fairly simple. There are grooves here, 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 and here that keep the case in a locked position. To remove it, all we have to do is push the entire board this way, so towards the floppy disk drive of the case. So to do this, I'm going to just gently put my fingers against the NUBUS slots here, and I'm just going to put my other finger on the power supply connector here, and I'm just going to slide the board up. You'll see that the ports have been moved out of their protective holes, and the board lifts up like so, and you can pull it away and out of the case quite easily. Now we have the entire board free out of the computer case, and we can get a closer look at things. Right away I could see a lot of dust and grime around these capacitors here. I'm not sure if they are leaking or if they're just dirty. There are a few different capacitors that are used on this motherboard. I'll put a link in the description of this video to show you which capacitors you need to order to replace them. If we take a look at this capacitor here, it looks like it has already leaked. You can see there's some discoloration on the board here. Hopefully this is not beyond repair. Now, it isn't my first time soldering, but it is my first time replacing capacitors. I've looked up a little bit about this subject, and there are a few different ways to do it, so by all means, what I'm about to show you is just my own method. I'm literally trying this out for the first time on video, so we'll see if it's successful or not. But I would suggest looking around for some videos, some documentation, and determining what works best for you. Since the solder pads are not visible on this capacitor, I saw online that one method to remove them is to simply twist them off with a pair of needle nose pliers. I've tested this on a broken motherboard and it seemed to work okay. Okay, that wasn't too bad. Now if we take a look at the bottom of this capacitor, you could see the contacts there at the bottom, both the positive and the negative contacts. So the capacitor came off pretty easily, and we just have to remove some of this plastic off the board, which is quite simple. Since we twisted off the capacitor, the feet that were soldered onto the board in the factory are still there, so we'll have to remove those before we solder on a replacement capacitor. Thankfully on this motherboard, the plus is there to signify we put the positive part of the capacitor lead there and the negative over here. So I'm just removing these feet with the soldering iron here. They can be a bit difficult to remove, but I eventually got it. Next, I'm just cleaning off the board with a bit of baking soda and a drop of water. And now I'm going to be putting in the new capacitor. Unlike some capacitors, this one is only surface mounted, so it doesn't go through the entire board. I'm using this little handy helper device with this alligator clip here to help hold the capacitor in place because it's so tiny. I'm just going to put some flux on the board, and now I'm going to solder the capacitor directly to the motherboard. Okay, now we're going to solder the negative side of the capacitor here. You notice that the negative terminal usually has a dotted pattern on it. Okay, so you've seen me do one, you've seen me do the rest of them, so let's fast forward through the magic of video here until all the other capacitors have been replaced. Okay, so we made some good progress. I replaced this capacitor here, 3 over here, 1 here, and 6 over here. I'm going to bring this downstairs into the basement real quick before I replace these 4, just because I'm curious if it even turns on now, and if I screwed up, I want to know before I continue. Okay, so we are back in the mess that is my basement. We just replaced some capacitors here on the Macintosh IIcx. I didn't replace the big ones yet. I'm a little nervous to see if I actually replace these ones successfully. It's my first time doing this, so I have the lid open here in case anything blows up. I have a breakaway power cord here, so I could always unplug it really quickly. I have the case off, the top case off rather, and the hard drive and the floppy drive are removed. I only have the power supply and the speaker. Have the keyboard hooked up, no monitor or anything. So I just want to see if this light goes on and if we hear a startup chime. So without further ado, let's try it out. Here goes nothing. Hey! Hey! It worked! Okay, I had to press it twice, so that's not bad. Lights on, I heard the startup chime. Now I did put a video card and tried to start it up again, but there was no video on the screen even after I switched to a different video card. I'm not sure if this is capacitor related or what. But for now, let's bring it back upstairs and we'll finish soldering those 4 new capacitors on the motherboard. So this was the original capacitor, had a pin coming out the left and the right. These have the pins coming out on the bottom, but I was able to just bend the pin and put it right through the hole where the other one was. So it doesn't look like it'll be an issue, and actually these are quite easy to replace. Well, I sure ate those words, because although they are a little easier to replace, these pins have to go directly through the board, which requires you to heat up a little more solder, and that can be difficult, especially when removing the pins themselves from the old capacitors. Eventually I got them all soldered, but it was a lot more work than I thought it would be. So with now all of the capacitors replaced, I'm going to bring this back downstairs again, plug it into a monitor, and see if we could get that video to work. I'm crossing my fingers and I really hope this resolves that issue. But of course, before we do that, we'll just have to put the motherboard back in the case. When putting the motherboard back in the case, be careful of aligning the ports. You want to make sure that everything, especially these little metal pins and guides, are resting on top of or on the side of the ports. Once everything is aligned, carefully slide the board back in the case and everything should line up nicely. Now to put everything back together, we're going to follow the same steps we did earlier when taking it apart, but of course now in reverse. Okay, some bad news. I can't get the video to work. I've tried 3 different video cards. The IIcx and the IIci don't display video while using these cards, but my Centrus 650 desktop does. So I'm not sure if it's the cards, or if it's the computer, or if it's a combination of the two. I'm not really sure. The IIci works because it has video built into the board, and the IIcx requires a video card. So although it'll boot up and it tries to access the floppy drive and the hard drive, and I could hear it doing something, it's just not displaying any video on the screen. So unfortunately it didn't work out this time, which was kind of a bummer. I just record these things as it happens, so I don't really know if I'm going to be successful or not. However, I'm going to keep playing around with the IIcx, see if I can get it to work. Maybe you guys have some tips. We'll see what happens. But until then, I'm going to try and play around with the Macintosh IIci, and I'll start looking at some other things around here that might be worthy of a video. Although things didn't go as planned during this video, I hope you enjoyed watching it. I certainly enjoyed making it. Thank you for watching and tuning in. I'll certainly have something cool to show you next time here on Mac84, and I'll see you next time.